Give me a moment, please. I think I'll take a swig. Well, good morning to all. We are continuing with our study of Genesis. I think we will begin in chapter 29, perhaps making a couple of comments about the previous chapter to get us up to speed. I noticed when I came in the beautiful portrait of a nature scene that Chris had put up on the monitors for us. Beautiful. I really do like things like that. I remember in high school seeing that we had to study in English literature a lot about the English or New England transcendentalists, that you had people like Henry David Thoreau, who was one of the transcendentalists of New England. He was also a romantic writer in the technical sense of romance for that period of time, who spent, 2 or 3 years on Walden's Pond and wrote about it. And he was so enamored with the beauties of nature. I could just imagine it's a place like that. That looks maybe Canadian or something. I'm not sure. And I was attracted to that, but I realized not for the same reason Thoreau was. He had a limited point of view. What this does for us as human beings is just makes contact with that part of our being that recognizes there's a higher power. Now, the transcendentalists believed in a transcendent power. They didn't go far enough. They didn't identify the power properly as the personal God of the Bible, Jehovah God of the Hebrew Christian Scriptures. They fell short of that, but thankfully, having a love for nature in that way, many of us came to see that there is something far above nature. It wouldn't even be here. This beauty could not be appreciated were it not for the fact we're made in God's image. We're made to inhabit this world. So thank you for putting that up. Now let's go back again to our study of the book of Genesis, the foundational book of all the Bible, as we've pointed out several times. We are studying now about the life of Jacob, who will be the father of the nation of Israel. And we're going to learn several interesting facts about this man. We have seen last time that he went to Bethel, fell asleep there, and had the dream, the inspired dream. It was a revelation from God. It was a miracle. And in that dream, God, by His Holy Spirit, in some way implanted in his mind a vision of the ladder, Jacob's ladder, that went from heaven to earth. And he saw the angels ascending and descending on that ladder. He knew God was in that place, and thus it was called Bethel. Verse 22, he left a stone there. It was a pillar, and it shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. So he's making a commitment to tithe to the Lord, the true God of heaven. Now in chapter 29, the record says in Genesis 29, 1 and following, then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. Now, remember, what is the journey? Let's bring this up now into the context where we are. Why is Jacob leaving from the lower part of Canaan land where he had been? Why is he having to leave? What has happened? Anybody? Betty, what happened? Why did he have to leave? Did he have any trouble with his family? Sister Linda, you remember anything about... Last week we looked at that. Did he have any trouble with his brother? Anybody remember that? What had he done, he and his mother done? They had conspired to do something. All right, he took his birthright. And so what was his brother's view about the matter when he realized he had been duped? Okay, he's mad. And then what happened? Out of, what was the motive for leaving? Well, your brother's mad. Sometimes your brother gets mad, but you don't have to leave. But he did. He had to leave. Why? What was his brother planning to do? He was going to kill him. Exactly. He's going to kill him. And so he had to flee. Now he's also going to take a wife of his kinfolks. He's going to go to his mother's kinfolks. And he'll go to the house of Laban. And there he'll be looking for a wife. So we now understand why he's leaving and heading toward the east. And he looked and beheld a well in the field. And lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. This is the way we even do it today. My daddy has a well down in the woods near his house. They drink therefrom, and there's a great stone upon that well. It's kind of hard to move. I doubt that any of the women here could move it easily. I mean, unless it was a real emergency. And we're going to see that figures into the story. I made that comment because that figures into the narrative. And thither were all the flocks gathered, verse 3, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place, obviously to protect the well. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we, or Haran. We have also mentioned, this is sometimes labeled as Padan Aram. It's in Syria, northern Syria. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, cometh with the sheep. Now, was this a coincidence? Rachel, his daughter, is coming. At the time, Jacob was carrying on the conversation. So although it's an object lesson. Here, look, this girl here is kin to him. This is his daughter. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle shall be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together, and until they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. So here's our custom. Has to be done this way. We don't just open the well constantly. That's a lot of work. It's a heavy, heavy rock on the top of it. So we just wait till everybody gathers together with all the sheep, and then we remove the stone at one time. We water the sheep and the persons who are there, of course, and then we put it back. Obviously, this presupposes maybe one of the male shepherds, we're going to see, will have to be present to make that happen. So it's not the time to do that. Verse 9, And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So he's being chivalrous here. Instead of waiting for the other shepherds, the males, he's a stranger, but he sees the need, and so he removes that stone. And verse 11 is a very pretty passage to me. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. I don't think this was any kind of sexualized kiss in the context. And a little bit later it's going to mention how when he meets her father, Laban, he kisses her father. So it's a greetings. It's a harmless thing in this particular case. So he kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Why was he crying? What would cause you to want to cry when you meet this beautiful girl? Well, what was his purpose? He's up here to try to find, first of all, locate a certain group of people, and he's found them. They're at the well. So the people who know Laban are at the well. And not only that, but they said, but this girl is Laban's daughter. So all these things are coming into place, and he realizes now the blessings that heaven is bestowing upon him. So I guess he's just weeping for joy. She'd be his first cousin. That's right. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So at least it's not his half-sister, we could say. And we say that from our standpoint later with developed ethical teaching from the law of Moses, and obviously the same principles applicable under the new covenant. We look askance at that sort of thing, marrying the half-sister. But in the earliest days, that had been done, and it's not yet ruled out. But in this case, we're removing the kinship even a little bit farther. Verse 12, And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. I wonder if he went into the details about how he deceived his brother. I don't know if he told him everything. You know, it's going to come back to haunt him. I'm just jumping ahead. It's going to come back to haunt him. The deceiver will be deceived. The trickster is going to be tricked. What goes around comes around. I know it's an old cliche, but that's going to be found right here in this very narrative. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. In other words, you're kin to me. And he abode with him the space of a month. While he's there, obviously, he's working with him. He's not just sitting around watching them work. You saw his disposition to move the heavy stone from the well and be involved. He knew some things about that kind of lifestyle, so he fit right in. And Laban said unto Jacob, Behold, thou art my brother. Now, not literally, but in the sense of kinsman, right? Shouldest thou serve me for naught or for nothing? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? So obviously he's just been working right there with the flocks and the herds, and he hasn't asked for anything yet. And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed. Let me look at another translation. I think it means she was weak of eyes. I think tender-eyed carries that idea. That's how it's translated in the King James, rather. Does anybody have?
English Standard says Leah's eyes were weak.
Weak of eyes. Thank you. That's the idea behind the original Hebrew language. So she couldn't see very well. Today, we would imagine her with the thick glasses, the bottle glasses. I mean, I'm trying to be facetious in a way, but she didn't see very well. So she was not blessed perfectly with perfect health. So it didn't matter what Jacob looked like, right? I'm just kidding. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel. Anything wrong with that? No, it's just the way God made human beings. It's natural attraction. And there's nothing illicit about this particular relationship. It meets God's approval. And here's what he proposed. The question had been, what do you need for serving me? Laban wants to know, and Jacob says, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Wow, that's a big commitment, isn't it? 7 years of hard labor out there working with the flocks. If you'll give me Rachel for a wife. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man, especially, someone outside of the clan, for example. Abide with me. So he agrees. He says he does. He says he agrees. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. I used to talk about this in sermons. We've heard of the patience of Job, James says. How the Lord was merciful after all the afflictions Job endured. And so that is proverbial. It's proverbial, the patience of Job. And yet I've pointed out, we forget sometimes of the patience of Jacob. He was a patient man working 7 years in order to achieve the goal of marrying this beautiful woman that he had fallen in love with. So he served him 7 years. Wow, what drudgery. Is that correct? Is that the way he looked at it? Like, I can't wait till this period is up. No, the years flew by. They always say how time flies when you're having fun. In other words, he was very thankful to have this opportunity to work, even if it was hard work, because in 7 years, it's just 7 years, that's all. I'll get her to be my wife. And they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. Oh, Shakespeare couldn't do any better than this. In fact, the great dramatists of England and the Elizabethan period, they just could not in any way match. They, in fact, got much of their material from the biblical narrative and the ideas. What I'm saying is this is a romantic passage. We all see that? And Jacob said unto Laban, verse 21, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. So obviously, this was a chaste relationship. 7 years of patience. He loved her, he wanted her, and she probably was attracted to him, but nothing that was illicit or wrong went on during that period of time. He wanted to go into her now. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now I want to just stop and focus on that latter phrase, he made a feast. Well, first, he gathered the men. He gathered everybody together and made a feast. Why did he make the feast? What had Jacob requested? He wants to consummate the marriage. He wants to actually formally marry her. They'd been kind of like in a betrothal or engagement period for these 7 years. He wants to formally marry her. So there is this public celebration. I bring that up, and it does matter for this simple reason. There is a theory afoot that I've heard often in other countries, for example, by some well-meaning brethren, but they are misguided, that all you have to do is just decide to be husband and wife. Just decide privately. and no one else has to know about it. But that really does not meet the biblical criteria for marriage, because it does first and foremost involve that vow or commitment made between the two. The two members of the couple have to share that mutual intent to be husband and wife. Without that, that's the essential point up front. It's a necessary condition. But it isn't sufficient to make a formal marriage until others are apprised of that desire to be married. In other words, we want everybody to know, anybody who might be interested, that we are committing to one another. Again, that does really matter in the grand scheme of things as we preserve the biblical definition of marriage. Somebody says, well, their ceremonies are different from our ceremonies in an Anglo-Saxon culture. Well, that's true. They are different, but there was a ceremony, something like a formal ceremony. Okay, I spent enough on verse 22. And let's move on to 23. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. So you can imagine now what's going on. Obviously, first of all, a tent must be involved. A darkened tent, secondly. The expectation is he's going to go into his wife Rachel, and he's going to lie with her in intimacy. And then the next day there'll be celebration and joy. So I guess this was their custom in that region. So he went in unto her, and there was no flashlight in the tent, no lantern in the tent. And he sleeps with this woman he takes to be his wife, Rachel. But what's going on? Well, let's just see what happens. And let's just ask ourselves, did Jacob deserve this? Is there such a thing as poetic justice? And we'll go back and talk about that again. So, look, he went in unto her. So he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. That's going to figure into the narrative. In fact, I had forgotten, I was reminded in the continual study just how important these handmaids will be for the entire history of the world, for the history of Israel. Some of the tribes will come from the handmaids. And it came to pass that in the morning, when the sun came up and you could see, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? Again, what goes around comes around. Why do I say that? Well, who is this speaking? It's the one who beguiled his father to get his brother's birthright. And Laban said, Now Laban is his mother's brother. And his mother was one who cooked up the scheme of stealing the birthright. Remember how that came about when Esau went into the field to get the venison? So it's just a family tradition, and he's just carrying on the family tradition. And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country. In other words, this is our custom. I forgot to tell you that little detail. After all these 7 years, it just slipped my mind, but I should have told you, you have to marry the oldest first. That's not right for the younger to be wed out first. And must not be done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week. In other words, stay with her a week. It's a long honeymoon with Leah. And give her her due. And we will give thee also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. In other words, here's a guy who really can scheme and connive. He already had him for 7 years, thinking he was going to get Rachel then. But no, he gets Leah. But he says, oh, okay, all right. Stay with Leah for a week. And you'll get Rachel, but you've got to commit to staying here another 7 years. So 14 years altogether to work for him. And how much did he love Rachel? Well, enough to where he went along with this, even though he kind of asked for this sort of thing in the earlier facet of his life. And Jacob did so, verse 28, and fulfilled her week, that's of Leah, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. So he didn't have to wait, according to the text as I read it, at the end of the other 7 years. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. Again, remember these names. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. So there's some joy and sadness to that verse to me, in a way, if you were to look at it from the perspective of Leah. It's sad, is it not? Here, she was not most favored. When he first moved into the area and met the family, The first person he saw was, of the family, the first person was Rachel. So his eyes had already been set upon Rachel. He loved Rachel, even though she happened to be the younger. And he wasn't wanting to have Leah. That was not his purpose. But his father-in-law tricked him, and that's how he ended up having these two wives. So he served him yet 7 other years. Now, here's the bad part. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, come in, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So we're getting into some complicated areas here, some dynamics in human relations. And a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious to us. In other words, we would figure this kind of thing could happen. This kind of envy that's going to take place and rancor in the family. And no doubt this is the reason why God's ideal has always been from the beginning. God made Eve for Adam. He didn't make Eve and another woman too. He made Eve for Adam. God's ideal is that there's one man and one woman. Men over the years, I guess you could say, as Jesus would say about divorce, because of the hardness of their heart, wanted to have more than one wife. And so they did, and it was tolerated in the patriarchal period. It would be tolerated under the law of Moses, but again, not God's ideal will. And now under the new covenant of Christ, we are to follow God's ideal will, in which there is to be one man and one woman. So it creates problems that are obvious. Leah was hated. What does the text mean by saying she was hated? What can you at least infer from that? Compared to Rachel, anyone? She was not his choice. So the Bible will use the terms love and hate. Sometimes you could say, some might use the word as a hyperbole or a strong way of stating it that's almost an exaggeration. In other words, I don't think that we necessarily believe Jacob went around slapping Leah all the time and he didn't like her whatsoever. I don't know that we can gather that from what's said here. But he loved Rachel most, which means in comparison, it's a relative thing. He loved her less. So here, hatred means to love less. And of course, our Lord talks about how we are to hate our father and mother to be his disciples. We're to love him first. And in that sense, I think, one is to be preferred over the other. Jesus teaches he's to be preferred over all of our other earthly relations. So God realizes the plight of this woman. We've seen this already in Genesis. Remember where did God see a woman who had gotten the short end of the stick and he took compassion? Hagar, right. Remember that case. This was another situation we had a handmaid. This was Sarah's handmaid given to Abraham, and she bore children to Abraham, a child Ishmael. And then, of course, there was jealousy also in that family, the same kind of situation. So the two women there, it just didn't work out under the same tent. And she's sent away, and God has compassion on her in the wilderness. She's about to die. She's giving up. This is a description of depression, deep depression. But God gives her hope and makes promises. Well, you have here that the Lord is concerned. I just see here a lesson that transcends just the simple narrative itself, that God cares about the Leahs of this world. So he opened her womb, and she was allowed to have children, whereas at this time Rachel is barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Why would she think that? In other words, I was the one of these two girls. I was the one that is able to have a child. So because of this, Jacob must surely favor me now more than he did. I don't know that was what the consequence was, but obviously she is the mother of his children. So it may cement their relationship again. The whole thing could have been avoided, this situation, if Laban hadn't tricked him. Jacob was only looking for Rachel. He wasn't looking to be a polygamist, but his father-in-law tricked him. So what we see here is God blesses her, and she has a child, and she thinks now things will be better. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard, I was hated. She realized that providence was favoring her. She was not loved as much as her sister, her younger sister in the family. And so God is blessing her as a compensation or consolation prize. He hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. So we see then that Reuben and Simeon are actually the sons of Leah. And she conceived again and bare a son and said, Now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi. Again, now we're reminded Levi is a child of Leah. And she conceived again and bare a son. And she said, Now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. So she has these, 4 sons? These will all be the heads of tribes of the nation of Israel. And one of them is Judah. And why is that significant? Why is Judah a prominent tribe in the history of the plan of salvation? Exactly. The scepter would not depart from Judah. That's going to be later on the blessing that's given. Nor a ruler from between his feet until Shiloh come. And the blessings of the nation will come through Shiloh. It's a messianic prophecy saying it's going to come through Judah. We'll see this a little bit later on in our narrative. So this is important, I think. I guess it's one of those things you just don't think about all the time. But actually, Leah was the mother of Judah. So verse 1 of chapter 30. Any questions or comments on this point before we move on to the next chapter? All right, Genesis 30 and verse 1. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. Is that not the predictable outcome of all of this? Why we see the wisdom of God in monogamy, in a monogamous relationship. Why we see that polygamy does not meet his approval, and why it creates friction and trouble. And we see here she was envious. Rachel envied her sister. What does envy mean then? We get a pretty good idea of it. She has a negative attitude toward her sister Leah. Leah can have children. At this time, Rachel cannot have children. So Rachel looks at her sister, and instead of being motivated and being inspired, wow, what a great example. I'm going to try even harder. I'm going to win his love more, and maybe God will bless. No, she gets mad at her sister. That's envy. In other words, I don't want her to have that if I can't have it. Seems to be the idea. And said unto Jacob, Give me children or else I die. So now, who is she putting the responsibility on and blaming? Well, he takes it to be on me, he says in verse 2. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. Well, here's trouble in paradise, you might say, because he loved her and she was his first choice. But now that she's blaming him, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? In other words, is it my fault? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, going unto her. So this is the same sort of patriarchal age practice that we saw in Abraham's family. Now we see it again in Jacob's. Go unto Bilhah, going unto her. See, legally she's my servant. So you have a child by her, and that will legally be my child. And she bare upon my knees that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. So Dan is actually the son of one of her servant girls, Bilhah. But what we see here is that the legal relationship of Rachel to this son means that she considered him to be her son. Not biologically, but she loved him and took him to be her son and was just as pleased to have him, because even though it was merely a legal relationship, it is still the relationship of mother to son. So verse 7, And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestling have I wrestled with my sister, and have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had left bearing. So remember, that's what the text said earlier. She had had children, and then she ceased to have children for a while. She took Zilpah, her maid, in other words, another legal arrangement, and gave her Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, A troop cometh, and she called his name Gad. And no doubt these proper names are significant from the original, having to do with these things that are stated that would be related to the name. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. So now Gad is actually one of Leah's servant girls' son. And Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. Now, verse 14, now, we have any questions about that before we move into some interesting things here? I don't have all the answers to some of it. I don't think many commentators do either. We'll just have to accept that things happen, and there were beliefs that some of the ancients held. Whether they were right or wrong, we're going to see they had certain customs and certain beliefs. And Reuben went in the day. Now, who's Reuben? He's the son of, which one was it? It's up here at the top, Leah. So I guess he's the oldest, isn't it? From what I see, yeah, he's the oldest. Verse 32 of the last chapter. So the oldest son, he went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field. Don't ask me what this is. You can look up different suggestions about mandrakes. These are, I think, certain types of plants, and they've got aphrodisiac properties according to their beliefs. In other words, these are love potions. Love potion number 9. And found whether they really were, again, it's not that God made mandrakes with some magical effect. It's that they thought so. All right. And found mandrakes in the field and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. So it's not just a love potion, it's a fertility potion, we're going to see. She had already stopped having children. And she said unto her, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? And wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes? Let me go back verse 14. I think I missed 14. And he went into the days of the wheat harvest, found the mandrakes in the field, and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. I need them because they might make me fertile. And then she scolds her. All right, you already took my husband. Did she really take her husband? That's, again, the rancor that's going to be there in a polygamous situation. You know what happened. We read the history. Wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? Well, he's my nephew. Anyway, and Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. All right, so here's the arrangement. It's kind of we don't like to go into the details, but they had certain appointments or times. All right, you can go into him tonight. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And God hearkened unto Leah. God did. I don't think there was anything in the mandrakes, but God did see Leah's desire, her earnest desire to have more children. And she conceived and bare Jacob the 5th son. And Leah said, God hath given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to my husband. She called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again and bare Jacob the 6th son. A lot of the children of Israel come from Leah. And Leah said, God hath endured me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. It's sad that she felt like to secure her husband's affections, she had to be productive and have a lot of children so that he would stay with her. Isn't that sad that would be the case? If she had had no children at all, he should have continued to love her because he made a commitment. He accepted the arrangement. He was deceived, but he did accept that arrangement after learning what Laban had done. And afterwards she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Good name for a motorcycle, by the way. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb. So she's not incapable of being fertile. It's just for a while in her life. And it appears it's all under the purview of God's plan for the world. This was God's doings in some inscrutable way. Now he does allow her to have children. No miracle has to be presupposed here, but in the workings of nature, God made it possible for her to have a son or child. And she conceived and bare a son and said, God hath taken away my reproach. Now, what does that reflect? What ancient custom or idea? We've mentioned this a few times. Obviously, for the ancients, barrenness was considered to be a curse, a bad thing. I'm not being blessed by God if I can't have children. That was the conception, that was the idea at the time. And so she just reflects, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So we see the importance of her having this son, Joseph, and she's going to have another. But Joseph will be very favored of Jacob, and you can see why. You see whose son he is. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away, that I may go into my own place and to my country. So how long he's been there? I think his other 7 years must be up, so it's been 14 years. That's a pretty good while. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service which I have done thee. So it's not asking something that's irresponsible. He did earn it. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. In other words, wait. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. So Laban's getting the better end of the deal too, by having Jacob there. He's a hard worker. God favors him. Good things happen around this man. I like him. He didn't want him to leave. And you can see why. He didn't want him to leave. At least wanted to delay the inevitable. In verse 28, and he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. And he said unto him, thou knowest how I served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hast before I came, and is now increased unto a multitude. So obviously Laban had some things, but now with Jacob he's been very much blessed. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for mine own house also? I've helped you out, Laban, uncle, and help me out. And he said, or no, it'd be his father-in-law, excuse me. And he said, what shall I give thee? And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock. So Jacob comes up with another idea. He's always thinking. I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. Now the significance of this is, that I think even to this day, it's not impossible for there to be these multicolored animals among the sheep and the goats. But they're rarer. They're not the common type of animal skin or color. So these would be rare, which is a fair offer. I'll go through and I'll find out some of these rare ones out of the flock. I'll take those, the different colored ones. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come. Verse 33, when it shall come for my hire before thy face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that should be counted stolen with me. So I shouldn't have any of those. Those belong to you. And Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked. I think that means striped. Is that what you're striped? And spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and everyone that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled or white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. So he's making some kind of weird object. He's taking these sticks and he's stripping off some of the bark. And he set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters in the watering troughs. I don't know how this is supposed to work. It's a strange thing. Again, they had customs, they had ideas, right or wrong. And despite their sometimes superstitious ideas, God does bless him. All I can say is that God will bless him. Not that there's a one-to-one correspondence between peeling these stakes and sticking them out here and gaining the purpose he had in mind. So he put them in the watering troughs with the flocks when they came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods and brought forth cattle ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. So he made the agreement. Laban said, you can have all the spotted. Yeah, go ahead.
There are things today called fertility drugs, and drugs usually come from plants, so there really could be something that made these animals more fertile, because human beings can take fertility drugs.
But just by sticking the rods out there where they drink?
I thought that the water was going through the rods. That's my understanding. Maybe I didn't look at that correctly.
Well, it says, and he set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters in the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink.
So to me that means
But
the actual watering troughs.
well, it could be in the troughs. I don't know that the rod, I don't know if there's any kind of fertility power from these sticks that he took. And again, I'm not very familiar. I haven't looked up very well all the different words translated. Our 1611 English translators thought he's talking about green poplar and hazel and chestnut trees. I mean, that's how they took these Hebrew words to be. I don't know exactly what the wood was, but he peels them and he puts them in the watering troughs. It's possible. I'm not ruling out the possibility that Jacob knew something about the potions that could leach out of the sticks in the watering troughs.
Same thing with those mandrakes too.
But the thing is, I don't know about the mandrakes. I don't know. I think in that case it was probably a superstition that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and he put them not unto Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle. This is natural. This is not natural selection. This is artificial selection, and breeders have done this ever since. There's something to the selection. He does notice the stronger ones. So he takes the stronger of the herd, puts them out there, and then when they conceive, that's going to be his animal. And they're going to get the better genetic material too. So that part has to do with just pure biology. And all the brown of the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks, so it says, put them not unto Laban's cattle. It came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. He didn't want them to have the speckled-looking animals that would be his. He wanted the stronger ones, and the stronger Jacob's. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Poor Laban. Did he deserve to be deceived in that way? Poor Laban. This is a dysfunctional family in a way. You have to say in some regards, and yet it's not the only kind of family like that that's ever been. And the man increased exceedingly and had much cattle and maidservants and menservants and camels and asses. So this is working out to his benefit. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, verse 1 of chapter 31, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all his glory. Is that true? No, it's a false charge, but people do that. People make false charges when they're wanting something, when they're wanting to get their way, they lie. It's the nature of propaganda. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. So you'd say at the least he had a scowl on his face when Jacob came near him. I'm glad that in-laws don't have trouble like that anymore these days, right? And the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance that is not toward me as before. I don't think your daddy likes me. But the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. He always tried to hurt me, but God always got the one up on him. And if he said thus, the speckle shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckle. And if he said thus, the ringstraked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraked. Then God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. The Lord did all this. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here am I. And he said, lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban hath done unto thee, or doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel. Ooh, it's kind of spooky. That doesn't make your spine tingle in a way. Here's that God with whom he had had this kind of special revelation, miraculous contact many years earlier. Remember when he was on his way up here to Haran. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Or are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. So these daughters of Laban are in agreement with Jacob, because they see that he's trying to rook them, rook the family Laban has been. Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels. And he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. Again, you can't endorse everything they did. So what we see here, Laban is obviously one who respects the true God of heaven, Yahweh, the true God. At the same time, they've picked up some bad habits from their pagan neighbors, from the Canaanites. Well, from the Syrians in this case, people up in Mesopotamia. What I mean by that is these little figurines, these little house gods, she's going to steal. Because she had this superstitious idea, if these little house gods are hidden away with my stuff, the Lord will bless me. It was wrong, but this is just what she felt. And it does figure into the narrative, although God will take people's ignorance sometimes and use things to his benefit. So she takes these with her. Verse 19, she stole the images of her father. 20, and Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, and that he told him not that he fled. Stole away just means he left without telling him I'm leaving, because he figured it wouldn't get a good reception in Laban's hearing to say that. And Jacob stole, okay, verse 21, so he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled, so he has a 3 days head start. And he took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey. So in a week they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. So he's being warned here. The true God's warning him. You be careful. He knows he's mad. You be careful about running your mouth. Verse 25, then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives with a sword? Now that's an exaggeration. They went along willingly. Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly and steal away from me, and didst not tell me that I might have sent thee away with mirth and with songs, with tabret and harp? Oh yeah, right. Sure, that's what you were planning. A big send away, a big party. No, he wouldn't have allowed him to leave. And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now, he has a legitimate beef here, right? You could say, I would say as a father, I could feel his pain. You know, you just took off and I didn't get to say goodbye to my daughters. Thou hast done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your fathers spoke unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, come right in. Because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? Now this is his biggest beef. Verse 30. Not only did you take off without letting me kiss my daughters goodbye, but you stole my gods, the family gods in the house. I don't think Jacob knew about that. Who did it? Women have a way sometimes being sneaking things away. So anyway, Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid, for I said, Peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. In other words, I didn't get them. Before our brethren discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. So I guess you figured one of the low servants had done it. And one of these boys, maybe get one of them, they may have done it. And Laban went unto Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tent, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images, and put them in the camel's furniture. I wonder what that looked like. What is your translation? Camel's saddle, all right. Camel's saddle, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my Lord that I cannot rise up before thee. Oh, really? Using her feminine wiles here. Come right in, brother. For the custom of women is upon me. In other words, it's not the time of month I can get. I'm sitting on this saddle, but I can't get up, Daddy. You understand. And he searched out, but found not the images. Too bad his daughter's deceiving him. Where did all this deception come? It's just a family of deceivers, right? And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. I've chode with people a few times. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin? Thou hast so hotly pursued after me. Well, for one thing, you snuck off without saying goodbye. If I were Laban, and you took my daughters, and I didn't get to say goodbye or kiss them by. Yeah, and the grandkids, that's right. Verse 37, whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? In other words, you've looked around, you haven't found these stolen gods, you allege. Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee. So now we see more than just those 14 years were there. He continued to stay with him for 20 years. I have been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn to beasts I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou not require it, whether stolen, or didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night? Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me, and in the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast a little bit less for the cattle than for a daughter. And thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away empty. He probably would, now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. So we're going to have to stop here. Right in the middle of this fascinating narrative, verse 43. Somebody help me remember, we're in verse 43. Sneaky little girl, wasn't she? I say girl, she's a young woman. She's obviously still a young woman because she makes the excuse, it's not my time of the month to get up. You understand, I can't get off the saddle. So that way she could hide the fact that she was sitting on those stolen gods. Anyway, fascinating history. Any question or any comments about this? I just find it very interesting. And it's also, again, the foundation for our understanding of the whole plan of salvation. Thank you.